Have you ever had that strange feeling that your whole life fell apart at once? Your job ended, the relationship left, your friends disappeared, and you stared at the ceiling at dawn without understanding anything that was happening? It was exactly like that with a woman named Mary. She was 34 years old, had a 10-year marriage, had a stable career, and in less than 6 months had lost everything. Her husband filed for divorce. The company went bankrupt, and she found herself alone in the apartment she could barely afford, thinking she had done something wrong to deserve it all. But do you know what happened 3 years later? She opened her own business. She met a man who truly loved her. He traveled to 5 countries he always dreamed of. And more than anything, she found a version of herself that she didn't even know existed. And when someone asked how she had gotten there, she would answer with a simple phrase: "Everything that looked like my destruction was actually my preparation." Now I need you to pause for a second and answer me honestly. Are you going through something that doesn't make sense? A door that has closed without warning, a loss that hurts more than it should, a void that you can't fill with anything. Because it may be that what you are experiencing is not a punishment. It can be a calling. There is a silent, profound, and often misunderstood process that happens with people chosen for a higher purpose. Psychology calls it the process of individuation. Faith calls it divine preparation. And the two things agree on one point: before greatness comes the collapse of what was small. In this video, I'm going to show you 8 concrete signs, which you can identify in your own life right now, that God, or the universe, or the force you believe in, is pulling you apart for something your mind can't yet reach. And the most powerful signal is the last one. Don't jump to it before you understand others, because the sequence matters. If you're ready, let's get started. When everything that was right starts to feel wrong. There is a time in the lives of certain people when everything that worked before begins to feel empty. The work that once brought satisfaction now seems mechanical. The relationship that once seemed perfect now generates a discomfort that is difficult to name. The usual friends, the usual parties, the usual plans. Everything remains the same, but you can't fit in there like you used to. And the most confusing thing is that on the outside, nothing has changed. But on the inside, you're someone else trying to pretend you're still the same. Psychology has a name for this: existential dissonance. This is when a person's inner identity begins to expand beyond the boundaries they have built up over the years. It's like you've grown so much inside that the old clothes don't fit anymore, but you still don't have the new ones to wear. And here's what most people do at this point: try to force themselves back into their old clothes. Try to suppress this discomfort. She tries to convince herself that she is being ungrateful, too demanding, too dreamy. I have a job, I have a house, I have a family, what more do I want? But this internal noise is not weakness. It is not a crisis, it is a sign. Carl Jung, one of the most profound psychologists in history, said that the process of becoming who you really are begins exactly when what you have built to survive begins to suffocate you. It is not destruction, it is forced expansion. From a spiritual point of view, this process has an even older name. In biblical traditions, every time God prepared someone for a greater purpose, the first step was to take that someone away from the comfort of what was familiar. Abraham was called to leave his land, his relatives, his family, not knowing where he was going. Moses was exiled from Egypt before he became a deliverer. Paul was blinded before he could truly see his mission. Discomfort with what was once right is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you have been summoned to something that does not yet exist in your life. And now comes the part that few people understand. This discomfort usually starts years before the real change happens. It is like the seed that begins to crack from the inside before any sprouts appear on the surface. The process of internal cracking is invisible, painful, and absolutely necessary. When you start to feel out of place in places where you've always fit, when you start wanting things you've never wanted before, when a quiet restlessness starts to accompany you, even in the good times, pay attention. Because that's not you losing your way, it's you being guided. The question you need to ask yourself is not, "What's wrong with me?" but rather, "Where is this discomfort pointing me?" Because the answer to that is usually the most accurate map you're going to find for your next chapter. And one important thing, this process has a fascinating psychological peculiarity. When people try to silence this inner calling, whether with overwork, with distractions, with relationships that fill the void without solving anything, the discomfort doesn't go away. He comes back stronger. Because what has been planted in you cannot be unchecked. It can only be postponed, and the cost of postponement is always higher than the cost of transformation. If you're recognizing this sign in your life right now, take a deep breath. Because what you feel is not the end of something. It's the beginning of everything. The doors that close without explanation, you've done everything right. He studied, prepared, prayed, believed, made an effort. And even then the door did not open. Or worse, it opened, let you in, and then closed in your face. This is one of the most devastating moments that a human being can experience. Because the failure of something we haven't tried is bearable. But the failure of something for which we have given ourselves entirely, that has a different weight. This makes us question not only luck, but our own faith, our own capacity, our own worth. And this is exactly where one of the biggest mistakes in the human journey happens. We confuse redirection with rejection. Think about that for a moment. When a door closes in your life, a job that didn't work out, a relationship that didn't move forward, an opportunity that slipped through your fingers, the brain's first automatic interpretation is, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. It's not for me. And this narrative, if not questioned, begins to build an identity of defeat that goes far beyond that specific moment. Neuroscience calls this negativity bias. The human brain has been programmed over millennia to give more weight to negative experiences than to positive ones. This came in handy when we needed to survive, but it becomes poison when it begins to distort our reading of reality. Because not every closed door is rejection. Some closed doors are protection. Let me tell you something that most people don't realize until years later. Many of the greatest blessings of human life came packaged as losses. The job that sent you away made room for the business that changed everything. The relationship that ended gave way to the love that remained. The city you were forced to leave took you exactly where you needed to be. But at the moment of loss, this is invisible. And this is where faith, both spiritual and psychological, becomes indispensable. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, described in his studies that human beings can endure any how as long as they find a why. Meaningless suffering is unbearable. Suffering with purpose, even if the purpose is not yet clear, is transformative. And that's exactly what separates people who rebuild themselves from those who are paralyzed. The ability to hold the narrative of purpose even when the facts still don't prove anything. From a spiritual point of view, closed doors carry a powerful theology. In the book of Revelation, there is a phrase that has been greatly misunderstood over the centuries. Behold, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. What many people don't realize is that this verse assumes that other doors were, and needed to be, closed. The open door only has value because there is the contrast of the doors that were left behind. When God is setting you apart for something bigger, He needs to close what was smaller. And that's not cruelty, it's surgery. The surgeon is not cruel when he cuts. It is necessary. Here's a question that can completely change how you're interpreting your life's losses. If that door had opened, would you have gotten where you need to go? Or would she have trapped you where you were comfortable but not growing? Comfort is the silent enemy of fate. And sometimes, the greatest mercy there is a door that closes before you settle into something that was never meant for you. If you are in a moment of closed doors right now, I invite you to do a different exercise. Instead of asking why not, try asking where is this lock directing me? Because targeting and rejection are very similar, but they lead to completely different places. And the difference between the two interpretations may be the difference between a life of resentment and a life of purpose. The loneliness that appears, even in the crowd, there is a type of loneliness that is easy to understand, that of physical isolation, of the absence of people. But there's another kind, much deeper and much more confusing, that comes when you're surrounded by people, in the middle of a party, at a table full of friends, and yet you feel that no one there really sees you. This kind of loneliness is one of the clearest and least discussed signs that something big is moving in your life. Human developmental psychology describes that every time a person undergoes a significant leap in consciousness, a real expansion of who they are and what they are capable of, they experience a period of internal isolation. It is as if the person has advanced to a frequency that others around them have not yet accessed. And the result is an unsettling sensation of being present in the body but absent in the spirit. Abraham Maslow, an American psychologist famous for the pyramid of human needs, observed in his studies of self-actualizing people that they all went through periods of intense inner loneliness before reaching their highest potential. What's more, he noticed that these people, instead of running to fill the void, learn to inhabit this space as a place of formation. But culturally, we do the opposite. We fill it out. He fills the agenda, increases the volume of the headphones, scrolls the feed, looks for more stimuli. Because staying with yourself at this level of emptiness is really scary. And here's the paradox. The more you run away from that loneliness, the more it comes back. Because it is not a problem to be solved. It is a process to be lived. From a spiritual standpoint, history's greatest leaders, prophets, and changemakers went through periods of deep isolation before they took up their purposes. Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days. Moses spent decades in the desert before returning to Egypt. Paul spent 3 years in Arabia after his conversion, in silence and formation, before beginning his mission. These periods were not punishment, they were classrooms. And the room was quiet because the teacher was an intern. Here's something people rarely realize. When God is preparing you for something greater, He needs you to know yourself deeply, because the mission ahead will require what's most genuine about you. Not the character you learn to be to please others, not the mask built to survive, the real essence. And this essence can only be accessed in silence, in discomfort, in the space where you are just you, no applause, no validation, no distraction. The loneliness you're feeling right now may be God's process of taking away what was noise from you, so you can hear what's sign. There is also an important relational aspect that needs to be said. Sometimes, this loneliness is accompanied by a natural distancing from people who were once close. Friendships that grew cold, groups that no longer make sense, conversations that seem too shallow. And the temptation is to interpret this as abandonment, but often it's just seasoned separation. Not everyone who has entered your current chapter goes on to the next one. And that's not tragedy, it's curation. God heals the people around whom He is being prepared, because the next level will require a different circle with other resources, other perspectives, other energies. If you are in a period of intense loneliness right now, I invite you, instead of running away from it, enter it. Not as resignation, but as an investigation. What is this loneliness trying to show you? What voice is trying to make itself heard when the noise stops? What version of you are waiting to be discovered in that silence? Because what many mistake as the emptiest moment of life is actually the fullest moment. Full of potential, full of formation, full of preparation for what comes next. And what comes next is often bigger than anything the old noise could offer you. The past that insists on appearing to be healed, you think you've gotten over it. He thinks he is fine. He thinks that episode is behind him. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss, the trauma. And then, out of nowhere, in a casual conversation, in a dream, in a moment of silence, it all comes back. With the same force. Sometimes with force majeure. And the first reaction is frustration. I thought I had already solved it. But what is happening is not a lack of resolution. It is a call for deep healing. Modern psychology, especially through the trauma studies of Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine, teaches us that the body and mind hold unresolved wounds in much more complex ways than consciousness can perceive. An unhealed trauma does not go away. He settles in. And it will manifest itself in patterns of behavior, in disproportionate reactions, in choices that seem irrational, in diseases that have no obvious medical explanation. And here's what's most important to understand. These contents from the past don't come back by chance, and they don't come back when you're weak. They come back when you're finally strong enough to look them in the face. The human unconscious has a wisdom that consciousness has not yet attained. He knows when you're ready. And when it is, it presents the bill, not to destroy you, but to set you free. From a spiritual point of view, the process of inner healing has an absolutely central role in preparing for greater purposes. Because no one can fully carry a large mission while carrying in parallel the weight of unresolved wounds. The unhealed past becomes a filter. It becomes a distorted lens. It contaminates decisions, relationships, perceptions, and God in His accuracy knows that it is not possible to build the new on a cracked foundation. Hence, one of the clearest signs that you are being set apart for something greater is that the things you have buried begin to emerge, not to torture you, to be settled at once, so that what comes next does not carry the weight of what was left behind. There is a concept in psychology called the tolerance window, developed by Dan Siegel, which describes the emotional space in which we can process difficult experiences without being overwhelmed by them. When we're outside of that window, or too hyperactive or too numb, the actual processing doesn't happen. He is suspended. But when we achieve sufficient stability, when there is security, when there is support, when there is inner disposition, the window opens, and the things that needed to be processed finally get to be. This explains why so many people go years without being able to resolve certain issues of the past, and suddenly, usually in a period of intense spiritual growth or great life change, everything begins to emerge. It's no coincidence, it's timing. Now, I need to say something that may be hard to hear. The healing of the past rarely happens on its own. It needs intentionality. You need willingness to look at what hurts. Sometimes you need professional help. And that's not weakness, it's wisdom. Some wounds are too deep to heal without support. But the most important point is, When the past insists on appearing, the correct response is not to push it back down. The correct answer is to ask, what do you need me to see? Because every wound has a message, and while the message is not received, the wound continues to knock on the door. There is also a dimension that goes beyond individual psychology. Often, what comes back from the past are intergenerational patterns, behaviors, beliefs, traumas that have been passed down from generation to generation within a family. And one of the most powerful missions there is to be the person who breaks this cycle, that heals in life itself what the ancestors could not heal. If you're that person, the one who's feeling the weight of things that aren't even completely yours, then what's upon you isn't just a burden. It is a sacred responsibility. And the healing process you are living is not just for you. It is for those who come after you. That changes everything. Because suddenly the suffering that seemed senseless takes on a legacy dimension. And you realize that you are being prepared not only for what you are going to live, but for what you are going to leave. When you start having dreams that are too big for your current life, there is a time when the dreams that pop into your head start to seem ridiculous for the life you are living. The distance between what you imagine and what you have is so great that the rational mind immediately steps in to disqualify who do you think you are. This is not for people like you. Be realistic. And here's where thousands of people make the mistake that will define the rest of their lives. They hear the voice of realism before they hear the voice of the call. But where do these dreams come from? Where does this image of a life you haven't lived yet, but that feels incredibly familiar, come from? That sense that there's something more, something bigger, something that hasn't come out yet? Positive psychology, especially through the work of Martin Seligman and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, shows us that human beings have an innate ability to imagine possible futures, and that this imagination is not fantasy, it is guidance. The human system of anticipation of the future was designed to point us in the direction of growth. The dreams that disturb us the most are usually the ones that most point to what we are capable of being. From a spiritual point of view, the biblical tradition is full of stories where God speaks through dreams, visions, and deep desires. Jacob's son Joseph had dreams that seemed absurd, that his brothers would bow down to him, that he would rule. And that's exactly what happened. But between the dream and the fulfillment, he went through slavery, prison, betrayal. The dream was not an illusion. It was fate being communicated ahead of time. And here's the most powerful point. When God plants in you a dream that's bigger than your current life, He's not being cruel by creating a distance between where you are and where you need to be. He's showing you the direction. The gap between dream and reality is not a reason for anguish. It is a roadmap for growth. But there is a serious psychological trap in this process that needs to be named: imposter syndrome. This phenomenon, identified by researchers Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in the 1970s, describes the experience of highly capable people who believe internally that they do not deserve their successes, and who live in constant fear of being discovered as frauds. And what the research shows is something fascinating and disturbing. Imposter syndrome is more common in the very people who are destined to do more. Because the greater the calling, the greater the contrast with the starting point. And the greater the contrast, the more the mind tends to interpret the big vision as arrogance or delusion. That's why so many people stifle their biggest dreams. Not because of a lack of capacity, but because of an internal protection system that convinces them that dreaming big is dangerous. But there is a question that undoes this system. If the dream you have is not illusion but instruction, what changes? And now I want to take you to an even deeper dimension of that sign. Because I'm not just talking about the dreams you have when you're awake. I'm talking about something that goes beyond. The desires that come when you're completely honest with yourself, in silence, without an audience. That thing you really want, but are afraid to even admit out loud because it seems too big, or too improbable, or too different from what the people around you expect of you. These desires are not accidents. They were placed on you with precision. Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest theologians in history, wrote a phrase that has spanned centuries: "Our heart is restless until it finds rest in you." What he was describing is exactly this state, a restlessness that is not resolved by external achievements, by relationships, by possessions, a longing for something greater that you have not yet found but that you feel exists. This restlessness is not a lack of gratitude, it's a compass. And the last point that needs to be said about this sign is the most important of all. Dreams that are too big for your current life are not a sign that you are wrong. They are a sign that you have not yet reached where you should be. And there is a fundamental difference between these two interpretations. One paralyzes you, the other moves you. The question that remains is, Will you hear the voice that says, "Who do you think you are?" Or will you hear the voice that says, "You are not there yet, but you are being prepared to get there"? Because the two voices will speak, but only one of them knows his fate. And before I wrap up this video, I want you to know something. The 8 signs on this list aren't about an easy journey. They are about a real journey. They are about that kind of preparation that hurts, that confuses, that tires, but that, when looked at backwards, makes perfect sense. You're not lost. You are being prepared. And there is a huge difference between the two things. If this video came to you today, it may not have been by accident.